At exactly 47 seconds into the congressional hearing, the air in the chamber shifted imperceptibly to most, but undeniably to those who've spent their lives tuned to the frequencies of power. There was no alarm, no sharp intake of breath, and no theatrical gasp, just an invisible tremor, like the sudden pressure drop before a hurricane announces itself with rain. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise from her seat or raise her voice. She didn't glance toward the cameras or the press gallery. What she did instead was reach slowly and purposefully into her folder and slide her thumb beneath the deep crimson wax seal on a plain envelope. The gesture was so quiet, so intentional, that it caught the eye of even the most seasoned staffers. With a gentle crack, the wax broke not like a performance cue, but like a door unsealing after years locked tight. It was the sound of something sacred, dangerous, and inevitable being released. The envelope itself didn't scream for attention. It wasn't glossy, embossed, or branded with insignia. It was the color of blood warnings and institutional silence. The kind of red that doesn't fade, only deepens. The paper inside was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in consequence. And as Jasmine unfolded it under the sterile glare of the chamber's fluorescent lights, what she revealed wasn't mere text or paperwork. It was breath that had been held for nearly a quarter century. A truth that had waited cornered and shamed and buried for 24 long years to speak. What lay on that paper didn't simply contain evidence. It carried grief. It carried names. It carried blood. Behind her, the American flag stood completely still, caught in the artificial stillness of the room's regulated air, its fabric unmoving, its presence haunting. It looked less like a symbol of unity and more like the curtain on a stage play that had already ended in tragedy. Each microphone glowed red not with anticipation, but like laser sights, waiting to catch even the smallest tremble in the voice of the one who dared speak against power. President Donald J. Trump sat in the center of the room, shoulders slightly relaxed, chin raised, with the practiced smirk of a man who had never truly lost anything. He wore confidence the way others wore armor, not because it protected him, but because it reminded others they couldn't touch him. He had outlived scandals. He had survived headlines, trials, bankruptcies, accusations, and betrayals. Truth, to him, had always been a negotiable currency. But this wasn't currency. This wasn't noise. This was something he had never faced before. Uncontested proof. Jasmine Crockett didn't need volume. Her voice came low and controlled, even in tone, but unshakably firm. It didn't ask for the room's attention. It demanded it by existing. She stated that the results of a DNA paternity test had been verified by a state-accredited genetics lab in El Paso, Texas. The paternity match was confirmed at 99.98% in almost mathematical certainty. The test wasn't fresh. It had been archived, preserved, and authenticated against a hospital specimen taken to decades earlier in West Palm Beach, Florida. The analysis was certified by a geneticist now seated in the back of the room under federal subpoena, her face blank, but her presence loaded with gravity. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't an allegation cloaked in partisan outrage. This was science, notarized and timestamped. This was law. The document in Jasmine's hand didn't cry out. It pulsed. It carried the weight of a secret too dangerous to be spoken and too damning to be ignored. And at its center was a name that had never been said aloud in these halls. Not in this way. Not with proof. Emily Santos. Jasmine let the name breathe for a moment, allowing each syllable to cut through the tension like a scalpel. She said it with deliberate care, as if it had once been fragile, held hostage in whispers, and now finally stood in the open. Emily was not an anonymous accuser. She was the daughter of Maria Santos, a housekeeper who had worked at Mar-a-Lago for years. She had scrubbed the floors, prepared the rooms, and existed like so many others unseen by those who signed her checks. Until one day, she was gone. No inquiry, no questions, just erased. Maria Santos had received a payment of exactly $3.1 million, routed through a Delaware-based shell corporation named Samaritan Ventures LLC. A company with no employees, no offices, no purpose except, it seemed, to hide. 10 days later, Maria was dead, found at the bottom of a stairwell. No autopsy, no bruising analysis, no investigation. The case was closed with record speed and barely mentioned in the press. One line in a local obituary. No photographs, no funeral, no justice. She was scrubbed from history, but not from blood. Not from the one place the silence couldn't reach. Jasmine presented the badge logs, time cards, tax records, cafeteria charges, internal memos, everything that proved Maria's employment and detailed the sudden and deliberate nature of her disappearance. There was no speculation, only documentation. Jasmine explained how Maria's death had been hastily ruled accidental, with no toxicology report, no surveillance footage pulled, and no signs of foul play ever reviewed. The $3.1 million had not gone to Maria's family, to Emily's education, or to any kind of known trust. It had vanished, like everything else tied to Samaritan Ventures. And then came the letter, a cream-colored page, folded and handled so many times its edges had worn soft. It was read aloud by Emily Santos herself, who stepped forward with no lawyer, no handler, no shield. Just the truth. The words on the page were simple. You were never supposed to exist, but I'll make sure you're taken care of. Just never say my name, no signature. Just 3 letters, DJT. She read them clearly, not with emotion, but with certainty. Her voice didn't crack, it didn't plead, it didn't tremble, because truth, when it has waited this long, doesn't ask. It arrives. Jasmine looked the president in the eye. Say her name, she said, not as a question, but a command. You wrote it. You paid for the silence. You buried her mother. Say her name. He didn't. He couldn't. So Emily did. My name is Emily Santos. The room didn't erupt into gasps. It didn't collapse into chaos. It paused, the kind of silence that follows a verdict, not a trial. Reporters stood. Hashtags ignited like brush fires. Hashtag say her name trended within minutes, and the digital world, so often dismissed, rose with the collective weight of a truth too long denied. But it didn't stop there. Russell Wire entered the room unannounced, former legal counsel to the Trump Organization. Not on any witness list, not on any schedule, but he carried with him more than just guilt. He carried names. He stated, under voluntary oath, that Emily wasn't alone. There were 7 more women, 7 more payments, 1 marked deceased, another vanished after filing a sealed report, each connected to Samaritan Ventures or an international web of sister shell corporations. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't a scandal. It was a structure, a system of silencing, hiding, and erasing. Networks stopped calling it politics. They started calling it what it was: a pattern. Allies deleted endorsements. Campaign websites went dark. Even the president's legal team went quiet. Inside the Department of Justice, a file marked for federal review began printing. A new investigation, a new reckoning. The committee vote came quickly. 9 in favor, 4 against. Motion passed. The President of the United States was officially referred for criminal investigation on charges of concealment, obstruction of justice, and coordinated witness suppression. When the gavel struck, it didn't echo. It settled, like dirt falling into a grave. Outside, crowds began to chant. Not slogans, names. Emily Santos, Maria Santos. The names rose through the marble of the Capitol like truth clawing its way back from the dead. Inside, Jasmine Crockett didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply remained still. Because sometimes, the sound of victory isn't noise. It's breath, slow, deep, final. President Trump left the chamber surrounded by lawyers with no playbook left. Cameras captured the twitch in his right hand, the rigid line of his jaw, the stare fixed straight ahead, not spinning, just falling. In El Paso, Emily watched on mute. She didn't need the sound. She saw the man who had tried to erase her walk into a history he could no longer bend. She closed the magazine on her lap, the cover showing her own face, and set it aside. Truth has a face now. And it's hers. Back in Washington, under a dim desk lamp, Jasmine Crockett sat alone. In her hand was an old photograph of her mother, arm raised, protest sign in hand, reading, "Our silence is not yours to own." She whispered, "You were right," and on a blank page, Jasmine wrote 6 words. "This silence doesn't win anymore." And somewhere across the country, maybe in a courtroom, maybe in a kitchen, maybe in a clinic, something cracked, quietly, but deeply. Because when a voice that was never supposed to speak finally does, the world doesn't just listen, it transforms.